Good evening. Annually, we go through the audit for the city's comprehensive annual financial report, and that has been completed now and was attached in the packets for tonight's presentation. President Gage is being represented by Mitch Marks. He will be presenting the CAFR to you guys, the comprehensive annual financial report. This represents our 9th award that we received from Government Finance Officers Association, and this one tonight will be the 10th one. Upon approval, we'll send it off for our 10th award. So the presentation tonight, we have a PowerPoint presentation, and then the latter part of that presentation, I'll go through and do some trend analysis and show what we've done over the last 5 years. Mitch?
Thank you, Don. Madam Mayor, members of the council. As Don said, we have finished our audit of the financial statements for the fiscal year ending September 30th of 2012 and have issued our report. Like you have that in your packet. The layout and the content of this financial statement is dictated by the Governmental Accounting Financial Standards Board. A lot of that we'd like to have a little leeway, but we don't have sometimes, make it a little more clear on some of these things, but it's a standard format, and it's consistent with the statement number 34 and 54 of the GASB board. 34 has to do with like financial presentation. 54 is more how the equity is presented, and the city a couple of years ago actually adopted a resolution talking about reserves, and this is where that would come into play, that GASB 54. The financial statements themselves are the city's responsibility. We just do an audit on those, and our responsibility is to express an opinion on the fair presentation of the city's finances. There's like 4 opinion letters in this packet, and on each one of those we have an unqualified opinion. Basically, the first one on the main financial statements has to do with the we say the financial statements are fairly presented. There are 2 opinions in here that are related to the fact that governmental financing is received. One is the governmental auditing standards that has an unqualified opinion. Nothing came to our attention that rise to the level of needed disclosure. The city expends over $500,000 of federal financial assistance. There's a letter just for that. During our audit, when we looked specifically at the federal grants, nothing came to our attention in that area either. And then there's another opinion letter just on supplemental information. Again, they're all clean. So it's like 122 pages, I believe, if I remember correctly. This is the layout. Our opinion, the main opinion, is on page 1415. The introductory section actually has a transmittal letter prepared by the city. The management discussion analysis has also been prepared by the city staff. A lot of this is pretty good. It's one of those where we've been, where are we going type things, and it gives a lot of more detailed discussion instead of just the numbers. Those are a good read for more information than just the basic financial statements. The number of pages, the basic financial statements are 33 to 66. The notes, required supplementary. You have to show budget to actual is pretty much the main required budget supplementary information. Because you are doing a CAFR, the statistical section starts on page 89. And then the letters I was talking about that are specific to the federal financial assistance start on page 110. The funds overview, the audit report themselves, major governmental funds, these are defined by mathematical calculation. You have to exceed like 10% of the type of the fund, and then exceed 5% of your citywide, and that's either assets, liabilities, revenues, or expenses. So if one of those areas go over that, you can see like the general fund. The general fund is always a major fund. You'll see that specifically disclosed. Street fund, Parks and Rec, capital project in Hamilton. Like I say, the general fund is the fund that is basically the catch-all. It's your chief operating fund where funds are specifically designated to go in any other area. Special revenue funds, they changed it's a little bit a couple years ago, but it's still pretty much the same things. These are restricted for a specific purpose, either by the council's action or by the funding source. This gives you a little bit of comparison on the fund balances over the last 5 years. Your general funds stayed pretty consistent. The street funds down just a little bit, and the parks and recreation has risen, and in the last 2 years has held. The enterprise funds are anything that you have, like the water, sewer, garbage. These are account for where the fees are charged for external use. You guys actually have in your accounting records a separate fund for capital projects for water, sewer, and sanitation, but for presentation purposes, these are put together. And I think we'll turn this over to Don for the number presentation, some of the analysis.
As Mitch was saying that about the financial statements, one of the things just kind of point out, the book's a little different color this year. We changed it out every year to a different color. One of the things that I want to compliment staff on is that Sue Nelson, Lori Lewis, and others really contribute to a lot of the making the book look nice. So I just wanted to compliment them on that as well before we start. Also, in the front part of the book, there's a transmittal letter that talks and speaks to the economic outlook of the city as a whole, not just the government. So we've seen some unemployment decrease in the Latah County, and so we've had some improvements. Home sales prices have gone up a little bit over the previous year. So it talks about the the overall economy and the health of the city as a whole. And then we get into the management and discussion analysis, and there's a whole bunch of information about the city of Moscow in itself that talks about all the highlights. And one of the highlights that I'd like, if anybody has a chance to read that management discussion analysis, is all the grants that we've gotten over the past year. We've done really well. And that helps contribute to the net assets as we see these things go through. This one here is about the water fund. The top black line is the water revenues. This helps support the capital projects that we have, and Les has about $3 million sitting in the reserve funds for capital improvements to this point, and it defines in our budget 2013 budget what those expenses are outlined for.
Don, are questions appropriate as you go along, or you want to start?
Yeah, go ahead.
A question on your revenue. It appears to have dropped from 8 to 10 and then turned back up. Appears to be either equal to or slightly steeper than the drop from 8 to 10. Any off your head explanation?
I think 10 was a wetter year. We had a couple wet years in 10, and also volumes when price went up a little bit. We had a little sensitivity. As the economy decreased in 2008-9, when people got their they shut the water off, and so 50% of our revenue comes from volume, and those are in the seasonal months. So
the Westminster Cathedral Choir under James O'Donnell. We've just heard two pieces of the 17th century Spanish-Mexican composer.
And that where our capital expense and operating expenses seem to have dropped from where they were in 2009, we seem to be building a surplus revenue at this time. What are we looking at for future expenses or capitalization?
Well, Les has defined that in the 2013 budget, and they include things such as well 10, improvements to well 9, which we've been seeing.
But we're going to be capitalizing a little higher expenses.
So those are outlined in the capital improvement plan in the budget. So.
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me, I would also note that it's not just price sensitivity, response to demand. It also is because we did a rate study in 2005 and 6 that each year contemplates a rate increase, and you see that every year as well. So assuming that the relative same amount of water gets used, it will generate more revenues according to the rate study application.
Yeah. That's one of the discussions we'll have. As in the 2006, we had that rate study, and Gary's exactly right. We've had rate increases during that time frame, but I was only speaking to the dip. So anyway, so we'll try it when we get going with the hopefully in 2013 we'll be talking about water rates again. And we've had several meetings, and we'll had it delayed to do some further analysis. So. These are the water net assets, and it's pretty much tied to that revenue stream that you saw. So net assets are increasing, and mostly relative to the water capital accumulation plan that I just spoke to. Any questions? Sewer fund has a lot going on here in this graph. The expenses are fairly stable. That's the darker portion of the line. And then we've had the upper portion is the sewer capital projects fund, and we've had some major capital expenses. But that blimp going up is refinancing the bond proceeds, so they're included in that. So that was $6 million, and so that increase is related to that. That's why you see a bond proceeds box in the queue there, and so we received those funds and then dispersed those funds right after we refinance. So that's what that issue is related to. And sewer net assets, it kind of smooths out the trend line, so you don't see that $6 million coming in and out when we refinance the bonds. And by the way, just for a point of reference, that saved the ratepayers $754,000 over the next. I don't remember how many years that was. I think it was 8 years. So it's fairly significant. The sanitation fund we have revenue. That also it was subject to a rate study. We just finished that, and that is holding true with what we've been planning. The expenses are down below that, so we have some accumulation for future projects, and those projects were planning out and recycling center improvements, and so those are in the 2013 budget as well. Sanitation net assets, this is real reflective of that capital improvement plan that we have in the capital budget, and then the operating expenses are down below, so in the blue. The reason for the change in 2008-2009 is prior to 2009 we didn't have a capital improvement fund, and so we segregated out the blue part and made one in 2009, and that's what's that represented by the tan squares there. Highlights: we've increased net assets by $3.9 million. We purchased a couple dump trucks. We purchased some police cars. The demolition on Mountain View and reconstruction of Mountain View parking lot, that was $310,000. And then the construction of the intermodal transit center is the remaining portion of that. And then College Street, lastly. So we show a little trend down below showing what those net assets were from 2008 through 2012. They went from $22 million to almost $26 million. The general fund revenues and expenses, they're pretty much tied together. Public safety and general government has been very consistent throughout the last 5 years, and revenue has tied pretty much right on budget. We don't have any contingency, as you recall, when we go through the budget process, so those expenses are fairly consistent with the budget. What is general government? So the previous slide, the general government, is that darker blue, and it's represented by legislative, executive, admin, finance, legal, human resources, general buildings and grounds, community development, and non-departmental. And it includes the transfers and commissions and airport, Moscow Pullman Airport. The public safety is all the police services from admin, police services, operations, animal control, dispatch, fire control, public health, engineering, and parking services. So within that, we've graphed out each of those categories for the last 5 years. And I'm not sure what that 2010, why that's like that. I'd have to go back and look, see why that went down. That one's puzzling me. I can't speak to that right now. I'll have to look at that. Anyway, usually that's trends fairly evenly across, and it's represented about from 2.6 million to about 2.8. So public safety, as you can see, is very consistent, and I can't really speak to any one of those three because they've all in the last 5 years have been fairly consistent in dollars. So, what is culture and recreation? It's parks admin, recreation, the swimming pool, youth center, Hamilton Indoor Recreation Center, the 1912, and the art fund. And there's those funds. What doesn't show up real well is the art fund is actually growing fairly well. And so those numbers are up, even though the graph doesn't show that. You kind of see that on the 2012 one. It's not a very large amount compared to the Parks and Rec Department when you compare the 1.8 million to about almost 2 million, but it's still grew a little bit. Street fund, this is kind of an interesting graph. It shows that we've been fairly stable in our expenses, but what happens here is that as we collect revenue and we save up for projects, Les and Tyler have been doing a really good job about trying to bundle their projects to where they can get economies of size. And we've been real effective in that in the last few years. Questions?
Council? Walter?
Don, back in the slides when Mitch was doing right before you took over, there seemed, if I remember correctly, there was a Parks and Rec fund increase that was sizable. And I was wondering if you could speak to that. I didn't ask at the time.
Let me go back to it.
Where's,
After this one,
keep going back.
forward or back?
Backwards.
Go toward the beginning.
I think it was that.
That was a graph.
This one here.
That's it, I think.
Yeah, the Parks and Rec fund balance, the light yellow, has gone up dramatically from 08 to 12, or till 11 and 12.
In 2011, we've been trying to get that on purpose, and in 2011, we passed our financial services policy, or our accounting and fiscal policies, and in that policies, general fund, Parks and Rec, and street fund, and water and sewer and sanitation required a 3-month working capital reserve. At the time, in 2010, we weren't even meeting that, and in 2011 we finally did. And so, if you notice, 2011 and 12, we're at that level now, and so that's why that's the case. We hadn't got to the 3-month working capital balances yet, and in 2011 we were able to attain that.
Good management, Dwight, right?
Good catch, though. That's a very good question.
Other questions? Don, congratulations. And we're so lucky to have you and your colleagues in the finance department doing this good work for us. We always enjoy being able to congratulate you on yet another GFOA award, and that we have our auditors coming forward to present these reports with you.
I would like to highlight Sue Nelson in this particular CAFR award. She's done a tremendous job, and she's done a lot of the brunt of the work. So I'd like to recognize her work on this as well. So
Thank you. We appreciate it.
You're not planning on moving, are you? No, maybe you better not answer that, huh?
no, I was just thinking about the when Randy left, we gave him a box from the finance department, and it said on the inside of the box, it said to a highly professional, we were highly recognized. It's never won an award from the finance department that always wins awards or something.
Great, thank you. I'd entertain a motion. Dan, you ready to make one?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to accept the fiscal year 2012 comprehensive annual financial report.
Second.
Okay, Dan's motion. Wayne's second. Other discussion? And then we'll start with you.
Aye.
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 Okay, that motion carries. We accept that with congratulations and appreciation.